Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 201, Marathons and Sprints. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rosberg.
And our guest today is Aaron Katler. He is the CEO of Upstart, which is the premier accelerator in the Jewish innovation space today. We're going to find out more about what that means in our interview. But basically, Upstart works with new Jewish initiatives and organizations to try to help them be more successful in what they're trying to do. According to Upstart's own mission language, Upstart partners with the Jewish community's boldest leaders to expand the picture of how Jews find meaning and how we come together. Upstart's venture programs support the leaders who are fueling a renaissance in Jewish life, creating new Jewish ventures like alternative spiritual communities, Jewish art studios, and social justice advocacy platforms. A lot of the organizations that we've interviewed on Judaism Unbound have or have had a connection to Upstart. One of the reasons why we positioned the interview with Aaron Katler for this week is because Upstart is about to open applications for their latest programs, both for what they call entrepreneur sprints, which are shorter-term immersive training programs that are for newer ideas, and for the Venture Accelerator, which is their 18-month program for organizations that are already up and running, and that's meant to accelerate them. Applications for both programs open on January 7th and close on January 21st. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to www.upstartlab, that's L-A-B, upstartlab.org/unbound to find out more about these programs. Also, you'll be able to sign up for a webinar on Wednesday, January 15th at 1 o'clock p.m. Pacific Time, 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time to find out more about these programs. Before we introduce Aaron, I want to do what Upstart trains organizations like ours to do, which is to ask for your support. We've often said that if everybody who listens to every episode would donate just $1 per episode, we would actually be in great shape as an organization. I'm not sure that totally is working, and maybe we'll have to consult with Upstart to find out how we might do this a little bit better. But in the meantime, maybe you can prove us wrong and potentially make a donation at the end of the year, something like $50 if you listen to every episode, or $18 if you only listen every once in a while, or maybe you want to donate $200 to celebrate our 200th episode, which just happened last week. Whatever you're able to give, we appreciate it, and we're extremely grateful. It's really only because of the support of our listeners that we're able to keep this podcast going. So if you enjoy Judaism Unbound, please consider making a donation at this point in the year. And now we'll introduce our guest today, Aaron Katler. Before he became the CEO at Upstart, Aaron served as the Director of Special Projects and a Senior Philanthropic Advisor at the Jewish Community Federation of San Francisco, the Peninsula, Marin, and Sonoma counties. And before that, for 5 years, he served in senior leadership roles at BBYO, including 3 years as its Chief Field Officer. Aaron holds a certificate in informal Jewish education from Hebrew College in Boston, and he also has an MBA. Another interesting piece on Aaron's resume is that he founded Endangered Spirit, a Jewish ecotourism business that led environmental education trips throughout the United States, Central America, and South America. We've had all kinds of connections to Upstart for many, many years, and it's exciting to finally dive into a deep conversation about Upstart and its work. So with that, Aaron Katler, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
It's great to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
So let's start by getting a deep sense of what Upstart really is. What is an accelerator? What's the organization about? What does it do?
Upstart itself was founded in the Bay Area in 2007, and it came out of a need where there were lots of people who had ideas for new ways to engage Jewishly in the Bay Area. And those people had ideas and programs they were starting and had no idea how to turn those into anything that would attract a larger audience. In the private sector side, there were business incubators and accelerators that were taking root in Silicon Valley, 20 miles down the road, that were investing lots of money, time, and resources in helping people with ideas grow and scale those. And the idea of Upstart at that time was, how do we bring those two things together? And Toby Rubin, who was the founder of Upstart, was working at the Bureau of Jewish Education. And that was her idea. That was her revelation, was let's bring those two ideas together. Let's invest in the people and their ideas, give them some money, a space to imagine, and build their ideas into real solutions for challenges facing the Jewish world. Part of her origin story of Upstart went back years before that with other organizations that were working in the same space on the East Coast, Bikurim, Joshua Venture Group, and Present Tense. And those three organizations were also fitting this need of people looking for new expressions of Jewish life, new ways to experience Judaism, and didn't have the tools or the resources to grow those ideas into successful ventures. Those four organizations working in the same space came together in multiple ways of partnership and collaboration with the same mission, the mission of inspiring and empowering emerging leaders to help others imagine new ways of experiencing Judaism. That was the origin story, and that led to a number of specific programs. So the original core program was an accelerator that was a 3-year program based in the Bay Area for innovators in the Bay Area looking to expand the picture of how Jews come together. And it was a 3-year program where they would get mentorship and advisors and skills training and a little bit of money to help grow their idea, giving people that time and space that they need to grow an idea into something that can be more widely adopted. So the original idea of an accelerator at Upstart then came together with the other 3 organizations who were running their own cohort-based programs as well. Present Tense focused on idea stage generation. Joshua Venture Group was really focused on leaders and their ventures, and Bikurim was focused on second stage, more organizational development. What tied all 4 organizations together was this real compelling mission of people want new ways to experience Judaism, and there are people out there with ideas that want to grow their ideas into ventures to answer that question, and they need the support to do it.
Can we talk a little bit about what that really means? Like when you're talking about an accelerator, as I understand it, right, we're basically talking about somebody who has an idea, it's already been in play for a little while, and what are they trying to do? And when you look at those kinds of organizations, what are you seeing as the problem that they're facing that you're there to solve?
There are 2 iterations of the accelerator. So the first phase of the Upstart Accelerator was really about creating a community of those people, putting them together, allowing them to learn from each other, really the network that they would build, and some of the skills to help them grow that idea into something that is sustainable. When we came through a merger of the 4 organizations, we took a look at the accelerator and we said, we've run 9 cohorts, right? We've graduated 40-something organizations from that accelerator. What do we want to do differently? How do we want to help them? And so the accelerator that we run now is 18 months. We accept up to 12 ventures into the accelerator, and we want people who have tested their idea, they've tried it and it's worked, and they have some instinct that can be proven that people want this experience, and now they want to expand that. They want to expand it geographically, they want to expand it in content, and when they come to the accelerator, they learn how to do that. They get the training, they get the network, and they get money. Everyone in our accelerator gets $100,000 of general operating support that helps them sometimes pay themselves for the first time, sometimes invest in technology or marketing or curriculum. So having that period, that 18-month period where they can actually invest in themselves and their work is unique. Most folks in the Jewish world don't have that, whether they're a startup or an established institution. One of the best national examples of a successful organization that came through the early phases of our accelerator was Moishe House. David Siegelman was in the Bay Area and had the idea and the inklings of starting Moishe House and came through the accelerator, which gave him time and the network and people like Toby and board members that helped him raise the money, generate the scalable ideas. And now Moishe House is one of the largest solutions in the Jewish world for engaging people post-college, pre-family. And they're expanding on both sides of that as well.
So I sometimes get into trouble because I think in math terms all the time, but I want to try and use that for a positive here. The word accelerate and the verb and the noun accelerator, you learn about them in physics growing up. To accelerate means to increase, if you're accelerating in a positive number, to increase one's velocity from one point to a faster velocity. And what that implies generally is exactly what you said, which is that there is an existing velocity at the starting point, like something is already in motion, and the accelerator is there to increase the velocity so that it's a higher velocity. That's what an accelerator in a car does, obviously. Yep. And I want to bring that up because there are two verbs, or there's two words I hear a lot in the innovation world, the self-identified innovation world. There's people who talk about accelerating, and there's people who talk about catalyzing. And I think you use both of those kinds of words, but I want to distinguish between them because catalyze, the way we use it in English, I know less about the physics definition of catalysts, although I know there is one. That's the extent I know. Catalyze in, English language, we seem to use it as like to get something started that is not in motion, which is also a kind of acceleration, but it's different. So I guess I'd love to hear a little bit from you about the different kinds of work you do with respect to taking these already in motion processes, organizations, projects, and making them, increase their velocity, accelerate, versus things that are really not off the ground yet that are being catalyzed.
Yeah, it's an interesting distinction, and I think we do a little bit of both. And I think in this world of innovation, which is a word we actually try not to use because it means less and less every day, but it is the world that we operate in. The idea of being a catalyst and an accelerator, I think we do both. I know we do both in the sense that the accelerator, like you said, the idea is somebody's got an idea, it's working a little bit, they need a lot of support to make it move faster. And the faster is the intention behind faster for us is the urgency, right? There's urgency that exists externally. The Jewish world is not keeping pace necessarily with the world at large at the rate of change that things are happening. And our bias is we need to keep pace or be ahead of that curve. I think that also it inspires sort of the catalyst in the way you're describing it. The ability to create a network and an ecosystem that is filled with innovators helps to inspire other people to see, well, I have an idea and there's somewhere for me to go. And when we shortened the accelerator from 3 years to 18 months, we created different programs on either end of that. So what we call sprints that are shorter duration programs where people also get a little bit of money that are for idea generation and to take the inkling of an idea and to turn that, to test it, to see, does it have legs? Does it have a future? Can it eventually be right for the accelerator? That's a really important part. When we look at the rate of innovation, the rate of creativity in communities around the country, it's not where it needs to be. There's a real, what we hope our work is doing is both helping people scale and succeed and also inspiring them to come up with new solutions and new ideas and see that there is a pathway for those to succeed with support and money that'll go behind it to take chances, take those risks. And that's the catalyst part, I think, of the work that we do, is really helping people see that there is a way to do that it's important and it's supported, and there is a network of people like them and funders that are excited and anxious to see them succeed.
Lex was using the analogy earlier about math and acceleration and all of that. And I was trained as a biologist, so I'm thinking about how different bacteria grow on a plate of nutrients. And that plate of nutrients is agnostic as to what kind of bacteria you're trying to grow. And it could be a really bad bacterium like E. coli, or it could be a really good bacterium like I don't know what. And I guess, then the question is, well, okay, so we're a great accelerator. What do we do if the only things that are knocking on our doors are not that exciting? So we can accelerate them, but then have we really contributed to the world what we're here to do? So I guess I'm wondering, number one, how you judge what and who to admit into the accelerator.
Who's E. coli and who's not?
Well, what do you use as the criteria to say this is something that we really want to accelerate? And I guess I'm wondering whether there are things that you do or that we could do or that one should do to try to say, well, maybe there's a stage before that where we really want to elevate the quality or some other elements of the ideas before they even come into the accelerator to make sure that we're accelerating things that we really want to accelerate.
we definitely have criteria. It's not just flying blind and every idea created equally. We definitely have criteria for who we accept into our programs, into our accelerators or sprints. When we look at innovation, it really is unique and user-centered. And so that's a really important gating feature of who we accept. The question of, are we getting the next big Jewish ideas, is a tough one, because there's a balance between people from within the system knowing the system well enough to shake it up, but being limited by what they know and what they see every day and not being able to really shake it up. And the balance of people from outside the system wanting to come in and really disrupt it, but lacking context of what they're coming into in the Jewish world. So it's a really hard one. What we want to do is try to bring those together. And so our work is really about blending different audiences so we can try to generate those big ideas. And it's something that we're thinking about really actively with a lot of our programs. It is a completely different landscape that we operate in right now than any of the 4 organizations operated in a decade ago. As much as we have very solid plans and programs and curriculum and evaluative approaches, all of that, we're also just getting started, and we're adapting our approaches to that. We want everyone to be more adaptive to the way the pace of the world is working, and we take that to heart. One of the big things that we're thinking about, to your question directly, is our largest program is Collaboratory, which is a multi-day convening of our network that happens every year in different cities. And we just finished the 7th one last year, and we're going to the next one in this coming May. And when we finished the last one, it was the biggest one we've had, almost 500 people. Everyone rates it 9 out of 10, or net promoter score, wonderful, or loved the sessions, food was fine, right? Like all of those things rate really well. And we ended up saying, is this the best we can do? Is this generating big ideas? Is this generating the ideas that will change Jewish life in the future? And if not, how can we do that better? And we had one session at Collaboratory this past year that was about the Jewish community of the future and what were the top 10 challenges facing the Jewish community. And it was a highly rated session, packed room, great things, great conversation. And we walked away thinking, are we asking for solutions to those problems? Are we asking those hard enough questions to say, okay, there's a new face of what Jewish families look like, or what Jewish marriage looks like, or the potential of Shabbat, or the end of denominations, all of those ideas. It's great to name those. That's nothing new, right? It's a new understanding of those. But what are we doing in our role, which is one role in the Jewish world? What are we doing to encourage people to come up with solutions to those problems? And we think of ourselves as, going back to a science metaphor, as a lab for Jewish experiences or Jewish leaders. How can we really take that approach where people can come, experiment, and also get encouraged to think bigger and bolder and weave in private sector approaches, Jewish communal approaches, social sector approaches that are not Jewish, funder approaches? How do we create an environment where that learning really happens and something amazing comes out of it? Funding, to pick up on that thread, is really hard for everybody. There's no way around that. The funding of idea stage, of scale stage, of growth stage, of any stage, sustainability, there is no easy place. There's no easy stage to be in where fundraising or sustainable funding is easy. That's a common denominator across stages. What we try to steer in the direction of is less competition for those dollars, right? Because it is hard. It's hard for ventures to raise sustainable dollars long term, and it's hard for funders to know where to put money. And so one of the important roles that we play with our funders is we are a regranter of funds. We regrant over $1 million every year into the field of Jewish innovation. And that's a core part of our budget. It's a core part of it's not a mysterious part. Our funders are very clear on that. Some demand it because it's hard for funders to navigate the noise in the Jewish nonprofit ecosystem when it's presumably democratic and easy to start up an idea, right? It's easy to start a podcast, I think, but it's easy to say.
I say it is.
Hey, don't tell anybody that.
Right, exactly. But you need a microphone and an internet connection, basically, and then content and creativity and all of those
incredible
important
talent
things that make it last. But it's pretty easy to say, I like painting on Shabbat. That's my expression of Judaism. I'm sure I can find 10 other people that want to do that. Boom. I am a social entrepreneur in the Jewish world. That's pretty easy. Doing something like that sticks, that's unique, that is actually solving big problems, it's really hard to do that. And so our idea with the sprints is how do we filter, again, what is unique, what has the greatest potential to be set up for the accelerator to then scale. Sometimes we get that right, sometimes we get it wrong. We've definitely had no's that have turned out to be amazing successes and yeses that have not. And that's okay. We think that's okay. But it's a really hard pipeline to say there is one path. But for us, we want to generate ideas. We want to help the generation of ideas. We want to support them to scale and grow, and then we want to help them sustain. And if they're not going to live forever, which none of them will, nor will Upstart, then how do we help them merge, sunset, all of those things? It's really important. We don't have good language around that because it upsets somebody no matter how we say it, including us. At some point, there was like hospice for Jewish organizations, right? How do we help them sunset gracefully? It's a really important piece for us that we think about a lot, again, for our network and for us. If we're successful in what we do, we'll be out of business in 10 years.
Yeah, well, so I both like that sentiment and also would push. So I love what you said about the sunsetting and all of those pieces, and it relates to something I want to bring up, which is Dan and I a little while back had a conversation. It was after Bim Bam, the incredible organization that did all sorts of videos online related to Torah portions and all sorts of other things. Right after they, whatever verbed, sunset, closed. And what we talked about is it's sad that this happened, and it's sadder that it happened in a way that like there wasn't a plan from the get-go that this would be a 10-year project and then it would end. The plan was this would become an organization. It would just sort of sustain, to use a verb that is used a lot, sustainable organizations. And I guess my question is like, the implicit idea seems to be that whatever stage you are at your organization, you want to get it more towards a sustainable place so that it could sort of exist moving forward in a more comfortable way. And I guess what I'm curious about is what would happen if somebody came to you and was like, I want to do a project for the next 5 years that will then be done, that will not, like planning in advance, that would end. And what maybe, to use a word that you used before we actually got on the air, you were talking about urgency and why it's so important for organizations to feel a sense of urgency. I love the verb sprint for that reason. It's, you got to do this now. People love saying it's a marathon, not a sprint, but this is a sprint.
It's a sprint.
Like what would change, or to what extent do you already do some of the work that is focused squarely on not like building an organization, but, achieving something in the now?
I would love to see somebody come to us with that approach of 5-year run. This is what we want to do, and this is our exit strategy. It would be an amazing approach for us to consider, for the Jewish world to consider, and I think really productive. I hear what you're saying about and even what I say about sustainability and long-term viability, and I don't think, and we don't think organizationally, that any venture that we work with, again, including ourselves, is here forever. And if there's no longer a need for a solution that exists today, it shouldn't be here. In a world where funding is not forever, if you can get a 3-year grant, you can sleep really well for 2 nights a year. That is not a future plan for anybody. And I also don't see foundations. I was invited to one of our funders to their board meeting, and I was asked the question, what can we do differently to inspire innovation or research and development? What can we do differently to help inspire that? And I said, make a 10-year general operating grant. 10 years is a decent amount of time to experiment. 3 years is not. 3 years is a blip. And 3 years of funding for anybody that we work with is a pipe dream. Any of the folks in our accelerator, let alone sprints, let alone Judaism Unbound, right? Like those grants are pipe dreams. How do you get 3 years, somebody to take that kind of a risk? All of that is to say that I would love somebody to come with an idea that says, we recognize the reality of the environment and the ecosystem we work in. There are more ideas every day. There are more people trying to be the next whoever, Jewish social entrepreneur that changes the Jewish world. And we don't want to suck up all the money. We're not going to get it anyways. Here's our 5-year run. Our theory of change is X. I see that on the funding side a little bit now. A number of family foundations that have started up recently are saying, we're taking a 15-year window. We're giving away all our money in the next 15 years. We're not setting up an endowment that's going to fund forever. 15 years, here's our theory of change. We're investing heavily and deeply, and we want to see it happen. I think that's a great approach to take. And we definitely have that conversation internally here. We shouldn't be built forever. We should be setting in motion what the Jewish community of the future looks like. And it might be we iterate to something different in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, or that we're still needed in exactly the same way and we keep doing better and better work. But I would love it if somebody came to us and said, here's my window, here's my change that I want to make happen, help me do it.
For what it's worth, I want to submit another metaphor into this conversation of the sprint versus the marathon, which is the relay race, because I think that's
I
something...
I was thinking that.
That's why we love each other. Because I think that we generally don't think that way, right? We and I'm not only talking about organizations living and dying and sunsetting, although that too, but just the process of transmission being a relay race where we actually are handing something off to the next person. And actually, when I look at some of the last 15 years of the Jewish innovation world, for example, it's interesting to see how sometimes and often, right, somebody who was initially engaged through Moishe House, let's say, they didn't go and become an employee of Moishe House, and nobody actually thinks that that's what success looks like for Moishe House, that there's some implicit understanding that Moishe House's job is to kind of get people from point A to point B, and then they should hopefully run off and do the next thing. And it feels like that's the exception and not the rule, or there's particular kinds of organizations that we see as, quote, engagement organizations or something like that, and that's their job, whether that's Hillel or Moishe House or Honeymoon Israel or I don't know what. And then there's other organizations which we imagine as these kind of organizations that you like settle in and live your life within. And I wonder if A, that's from a different era, and B, that also is potentially not suited to the time in Jewish history that we happen to live in. And I guess I'm wondering, when you're an organization like Upstart and you play a role like this, do you have to have a take on where we are in Jewish history? Do you specifically have to not have a take on where we are in Jewish history and you say we're agnostic, and having a take on where we are in Jewish history is the job of our applicants? But I'm wondering if, like I'm thinking back to the time of the Second Temple, we talk about that all the time, and you wonder, like, what would the Upstart, let's say, of the Second Temple period look like, where somebody could say, hey, I have this great idea. Like, people are just staying in these tents outside the temple when they're waiting to bring their sacrifice. It would be great if we could bring, a better experience to that, better lodgings. You say, oh, that's a great idea. Like, let's invest in that. Whereas somebody else comes along and says, hey, I actually think the problem is that people don't really believe that sacrificing animals is the way to get closer to God anymore. Like, people just don't, like, so this kind of Judaism just isn't going to work. So we could do whatever we want to do to try to shore it up. But the real answer is that it's going to be this sort of profoundly different thing. And I kind of feel like that guy is not going to be accepted into the cohort. So I think that my question fundamentally to you is, as you look at this landscape from this particular vantage point, where would you see that the gaps are in the system that really it's not Upstart's mission to address, or perhaps it is a future mission for Upstart, but where do you see the places where you wish there were more going on in the Jewish world?
So it's a great question that will allow me to upset both the Upstart staff, Upstart funders, Upstart board, and my family.
Finally, we've gotten to the next question.
No, so it's great.
Good.
So it's one that I'll make everybody unhappy with. It's an interesting tension point, because I think on behalf of Upstart, our job is to, as jargony as it sounds, they're the best words that I can think of, is really enhancing the vibrancy and vitality of Jewish life. That's very broad, but it also has guardrails. It is about Jewish life. And if you think of every idea or every person in Jewish life as a pillar, right, that's holding up this thing called Judaism, the more pillars we have, the more stable it is. That's the bias that we have, that it can be pretty wide. It can be things from gaming for Jewish teens to Talmud study in a new and unique way, right? Those things exist in the pantheon sort of what Jewish experiences can be. And so is it for us to say, where are we on the spectrum of Jewish history? Sort of, and sort of not, because we don't know. And I think we look at it as an urgency to keep feeding the pipeline of Jewish ideas that will really build out a robust Jewish world. Is it that we should have more tents closer to the temple because we want to stay close to what people think is authentic Judaism? Or do we want to say we want an e-scapegoat instead of shechting, instead of sacrificing a goat and throwing it over a cliff? All of that.
We're talking a little bit about, theories of change in Jewish life generally. I think that's the thread that's flowing through this conversation in many ways. I mean, when we talk about, the 5-year and done plan versus longer sustainable plan, like we're talking about theories of change. And another axis of discussion for theories of change for me is where the change happens to start and then where it goes. And I think that we don't always say this. Jewish institutions don't always say this, but I think there's an implicit understanding that most interesting Jewish innovations, most of those things are going to happen in the biggest Jewish communities, New York, Boston, San Francisco, Chicago. And then the changes that happen there are going to filter out into, first the next level down and then, the more suburban areas and then like the rural areas. And that's how it'll happen long term. And I really question that. And I ask it and I bring it up because I think your organization is an interesting case because you both have hubs. You have, hubs that you focus on those cities a little bit more and you have your staff people there and you work with projects that are not in those hubs. I know you worked with an organization in Milwaukee where I grew up as one example. But I guess when I think about my theories of change, and this relates to the broader way we talk about change to Judaism generally, how it comes from outsiders, to me, I actually think in many ways it's more likely that changes are likely to come from isolated, far-flung, small Jewish communities that we might not know anything about because they're not connected to the same network of national Jewish institutions that we spend our time talking to. But I actually think it's very likely that there are those kinds of innovations happening in small towns, in far-flung areas. And the issue is, I think it's in many ways harder for them to connect with incubators, accelerators like yours. And so I guess, are we operating, maybe this is a question of you institutionally, but maybe it's a broader Jewish question. Are we operating with an implicit floor of the size of Jewish community that gets to play around with this stuff? Are we really saying that New York, Chicago, San Francisco are the places that get to do this? For you also, Colorado and Boston. How should we relate to all of this?
Our strategy of having regional hubs is specifically designed around that question, right? It's not just the 5 major Jewish communities in the country that should have access to this sort of support and inspiration. And our approach of having regional hubs is to attract the communities around them. So if we have staff in Chicago, for example, we're doing a lot of work with folks in Milwaukee and some work with folks in Minneapolis and some with folks in Cincinnati and St. Louis and Cleveland. Not that those are tiny cities the way you're describing. Those are also still major Jewish cities. But that's our approach, is trying to bring the satellite communities together through regional experiences, whether those are sprints or collaboratory. Again, I'll upset some people here, but make one person really happy. Some of the most creative work that's happening in the Jewish community is happening in Atlanta, right? Atlanta is an amazing hub of innovation. It's being supported locally through foundations, federation. They've put a real emphasis on driving and supporting innovative approaches to Jewish life, the role of a federation. They're doing great work. We don't have an office there, but we do a lot of work in Atlanta. We partner with them on a lot of projects. We support them in a lot of different ways. And we would sort of be redundant if we put an office in Atlanta. We can help them in other ways, and we're doing that in other communities. Rochester, New York. We've done some work in South Florida. But we're right now we're doing work in about 19 or 20 different communities across the country. And we know that by typical standards and measures, there are about 150 Jewish communities in the United States. If we count federations or whatever the smaller version of federations are, they're satellite federation affiliated communities, about 150 of those. So our reach is about 12% of those. That's not sufficient. And that's part of our strategy, is how can we do that without doing everything, without trying to do everything, because that's the greatest recipe for failure, is trying to be more than we can be and more than we can grow into being. And it's always a balancing act of what can we do organizationally, how can we grow without falling over our skis. Those are challenges for us organizationally as we grow and scale. But I agree with you 100%. The idea of supporting people in Tulsa to move to Tulsa and create a vibrant Jewish community there. There's a lot for us in San Francisco to learn from that.
So I have a related question that has to do with our business, the digital business. I was speaking with a friend some time ago, and I think the question we were asking, or I was asking, was, do you think that the most important work on the future of Judaism is going to happen in the U.S. or in Israel? And he said, basically, that was a stupid question, that geography is not going to be the determinant of where things are happening in the future. Things are going to be happening across geographies and collaboratively because that's what digital technology allows. And I guess I'm wondering, when you think about a digital organization, and here I'm thinking in some ways about three that I know of, and you may sort of be able to add others, but when I think about Sefaria as this amazing example of a really successful digital organization that seems to be raising a lot of money and doing really well and getting all of this stuff out there and being able to accomplish its mission, then we have BIMBOM, which has closed because of apparently not being able to get enough funding. And I wonder to what extent that has to do with not being seen as a local organization anywhere. And because I think about us as another one where a lot of times I talk to, for example, a foundation or a family foundation that funds only in a local community, and they say, well, we wouldn't fund you because you're not in our community. And I said, well, what does that mean that we're not in our community? Like, my body is in Chicago and Lex's body is in Rhode Island, but it's like a magician's trick. You're looking over here and the real action is completely over here. So what's going on in that landscape today, and what do you think sort of might be a way to accelerate that?
What you're doing is not a Chicago or Rhode Island project. What we're doing is in some ways about local communities, and is another way is about national, international audiences that we work with. So that idea is very real. I think that the funding world is a very unique maze to navigate. And there are very few national funders of Jewish work that see that scope and that are built to support it. The Upstart model is built on national and local support, right? We operate in local communities, 5 where we're based and other communities where we do work. And we don't think of ourselves as a national organization. We think of ourselves as a network of local communities operating nationally, right? It's a very different mindset that we have. And at the same time, we couldn't function in those 5 communities if we didn't have national support. So when I talk to people who are purely local nonprofits, they say, oh, great, you guys have figured out how to get the best of both worlds. You get national dollars and local dollars. And part of that is true, but part of that is very strategic, that we think that is the way to scale these ideas. That's the way to share the learning, because the geographic boundaries, whether they're in a city or in the United States or in North America, are fictitious in a lot of ways. We're not isolating learning in one community, just like you're not isolating your podcast to one community. What are some models of philanthropy that we can test, that we can experiment with in a safe environment here that is about learning, not about, are you doing it in Cook County? Are you only having an impact there? But how is that spreading? And what we hope is that we can push the funding world that we work with to be more uniform in that sense.
Arcing towards the close, I really would hate to not unlock one element of your work that I think really dovetails just with all of our ongoing conversations, tracing all the way back to our first few episodes, which is you have this dichotomy of entrepreneurs on the one hand and intrapreneurs, which I think is a word either of your creation or I'm assuming of Silicon Valley's creation, or I don't know. I mean, putting aside for a second the business orientation of entrepreneurship, intrapreneurship, etc. Like, what that gets at for me is change from within, change from within an organization, versus entrepreneurship, which I think implies a little bit more of a startup external kind of model. And so much of our show has been basically us articulating our vision, or to use a term from earlier, our theory of change, that really we're not so convinced that a lot of change from within efforts without real sacrifices and really, really deep thinking will work in whether it's a synagogue context, whether it's a federation context, whether it's a JCC. I mean, any of these legacy kinds of organizations that folks talk about. The amount that it takes to make even small shifts in those organizations, and this ties to all the Clayton Christensen work that we reference, is astonishingly large. And so for that reason, we've generally spoken more with folks doing startup kinds of work. But since you do both, you have initiatives that are targeting both forms of change. I guess I'd love to hear your take on that. Like, to what extent are we overstating the challenges of change from within work? To what extent are we right? Maybe to what extent are there also deficiencies in models of change from the outside in? What's your perspective on what is in many ways our founding kind of question?
The short answer is, as long as the institutions of Jewish life as we know them today exist, we're going to do our part to make them better, right? And there are specific things that we feel like we can do to help them be more user-centric, focusing outside of their buildings, not inside of their buildings, that can make them more creative and create an environment where creativity can thrive within those institutions. There's a challenge and a problem with institutions in Jewish life, that it's hard to be creative and innovative and drive change. Before Upstart, I worked at Federation in San Francisco. My experience there was as an entrepreneur. And I saw firsthand somebody like myself who came from a very entrepreneurial background. I started my own Jewish business when I lived in Chicago that failed spectacularly. So I lived that reality. And then at Federation, trying to drive change from within, there were a million factors of why I was a spectacular failure there. Some that were about me and my personality, and some that were about institutions and what the challenges are that institutions face and how you drive change from within. And so I saw it firsthand, and I see it firsthand with the organizations that we work with. There are bright, inspired, creative leaders within every Jewish institution in North America. Very few of them are set up to succeed in driving significant change from within that institution. So we have a change accelerator that is not about how do we change XYZ institution, XYZ federation or synagogue or day school. How do we find the individuals within that network, whether it's a community or a field, that we can take on a 6-month journey to learn those same skills about how to be an entrepreneur from inside of an institution? How do you grow as an individual and say, I don't live in this building, I live in the world. I see the change that's happening. I see what's needed. I see our gaps and our deficiencies, and I don't know how to make change. Great, come be part of an Upstart Change Accelerator. You'll learn that. And part of that, a big part of that is helping to change institutions and communities, right? That's an important part. The other part is developing leaders, emerging leaders that will say, all right, you're telling me you're going to give me all the skills to change this institution, and I still can't get it done? Well, then it's not only on me. I'm getting out and I'm going to build the next big thing. I have that fire lit in me now that I can be an agent of change. I can be somebody who can take an idea and develop it into the next Judaism Unbound or the next Wilderness Torah or the next Svara. I see it. I can do that. The hope is that it makes institutions better and stronger. It's not always going to be the case, and we don't have control over that. What we do have control over is how do we inspire people to drive that change, give it their best shot, and see what comes from it. And I think that's our bias on institutions, is that they hold a really important place still in Jewish life. Synagogues, day schools, JCCs, federations hold an important place. What that place is being redefined. And institutions still have the keys to a lot of the city. Entrepreneurship as a skill is an engine for innovation. And we want to teach that to as many people as want to learn it. We're agnostic about where you clock in and out every day. If it's a WeWork, a Starbucks, your house, or JUF, doesn't matter. Drive change. That's the objective.
So last closing question. We've talked about all sorts of words. I like that we sort of honed in on accelerator and catalyst and a little bit on innovation, a word that we love in Jewish life. I'm curious, just as we close, are there any sort of words we missed? Are there any other core ideas, even if they're not just, about language, that you'd want to bring to our listeners as they consider, the world of Jewish funding, the world of Jewish creativity, all of the stuff that you spend your days working on at Upstart?
I mean, I think the language stuff is really hard. in the Jewish world, right? Like words that start making sense, nobody wants to use anymore. You can't say transformative anymore. You can't say engagement anymore. You can't say continuity anymore. And a lot of that is right? Like I agree with a lot of that. And all right, then you're just searching for new words to say the same idea, which is how do we transmit Jewish into the future while taking the good from the past? Unless you synthesize it into words that are coherent, then you're just saying like more and go. And I asked my kid, I was watching some webinar recently where it was about how to tell the story of your brand. And the advice was make it Sesame Street simple, right? Like that's the way to think about telling the story of your brand. So I said to my son, how would you describe Upstart? You know what we do. Like I talk about it all the time. You go to all these experiences. How would you describe it? And he said, I don't know, I guess, and he's 10, but he said, I don't know, you help people create Jewish stuff that doesn't suck. I'm like, okay, great. I'll take that, right? Like I went to Hebrew school at my synagogue. All of my teachers were Holocaust survivors. Shaped my Jewish identity of what it meant to hold on to the past and create the future. Our kids don't feel that way. Like it's a different reality. My kids, any kids, it's a whole different experience. So like being able to present them with as much as we can is our mandate. I feel like that very personally. It's our mandate to create an environment where they can continue to have positive Jewish experiences and define that for themselves. But they need a menu to choose from and also feel empowered that if they're not finding the one they want, they can create it.
All right, listeners, you heard him. If you're not seeing the Judaisms that you know are necessary in the world, let's create them. Whether you are, like Aaron described, a kid or you're, a little older kid. All of us should be on this project. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. We want to close this out by encouraging you to be in touch with us, and there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can go to our Twitter feed at Judaism Unbound. Third, you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. And last but not least, you can always email us, dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. Either works. The last request we like to make is that we really deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation that you can set aside and send our way. And you can do that on either a monthly recurring basis or just as a one-time gift at judaismunbound.com/donate. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.